it. So just bear with me. Okay, now it has started. Okay. All right. So yeah, we're making a start with Unit 3. So I just want to share my PowerPoint screens with you. Can you just confirm that you can see my screen? Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right. Okay. I just want to put it on slideshow. Okay. Right. So if you recall what we did in units 1 and 2, basically, unit 1 was about unpacking the impacts that decolonization, cognitive justice, and so on had on the implications for postgraduate research supervision, right? But now, and then we went on to discuss those emerging issues in detail in Unit 2, and we particularly focused on the PhD qualification and how the changes and the challenges we've encountered have arisen to a need where we had to look at different offerings of the PhD qualification. Now in Unit 3, we're going to focus more on diversity and inclusion. And when we say diversity, we're talking more about the cultural differences that impact on postgraduate research supervision. So basically, we're going to look at some of the challenges brought on by diversity, some current realities that we deal with in our supervision practices, and the concepts of diversity, how it can be viewed by different people. There is also the possibility of intercultural supervision, not only in terms of you and your student belonging to different cultural backgrounds, but also if you have an international collaborator, then there's cultural differences coming again. And we did have a discussion on Thursday where I think it was Deveshri who pointed out that to certain cultures, the PhD qualification didn't really matter that much, right? So, and then there's the issue of this power and relationship. Are you, as the supervisor, in the one who's in control when you guide your students, or do you leave it up to your students to develop their own ideas, their own thoughts, and so on? And then there's this issue of cultural competence. How well equipped are we to handle the cultural differences and the different norms that come along with these cultural differences? And then we're going to spend some time talking about knowledge diversity and knowledge plurality, as it's called, and the implications that this has for supervision. And lastly, we're going to end up about how with some discussion on how do we mentor and teach in such diverse conditions. So that's basically the outline of unit 3 and what we're going to cover. So these are some of the questions that are going to guide us in terms of what we're going to get out of this unit, and in particular, how you're going to use it in your final portfolio and your overall supervision practice. So we're going to look at the word diversity and what does it mean in the context of supervision. Are there any benefits to this diversity? Does it bring some new knowledge? Does it bring some challenges? What do we mean by intercultural competence? And how do we develop our cultural intelligence, or what they call a CQ? In other words, how knowledgeable are we of other cultures? And how do we cater for this in our supervision practices? And in what way is the mentoring of postgraduate students relative in the context of diversity and cultural differences? So I'm going to start you off now with a little bit of an activity. I want to give you about 5 minutes to think about what diversity is. Just write down your points in your own words, and then we'll have some discussion around that. So it's now 6 minutes past 9. We will reconvene at 11 minutes past 9 to discuss that definition of diversity. What does it mean to us? Guys, so this is let's also
the condition which both ovaries are better physical. The habit bears the both ovaries are physical, which also should that a number. Understand?
Okay, thank you very much. For those of you who joined us during the break, I put up that slide where I asked you to think about what diversity means to you. So, can we have some discussion around that? Let me hear your thoughts and your views on diversity before we go forward with this.
I think, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Prof. I think diversity in this context can mean people with different social, cultural, and ethnic background.
Okay, right? Different social backgrounds, meaning different societies, different ethnic backgrounds, meaning different races, and and also different ways of doing things, I would say. Anybody else wants to contribute?
Prof,
Yes, go ahead,
it's different.
Deveshri. Yeah,
I think also appreciation of alternative ways of thinking and doing.
that's it. That's exactly in the context of postgraduate supervision, and I'm glad it came from you. We got to be open that there's different ways of thinking and different ways of doing things, right? And that's very important when it comes to our supervision practices, because you can adopt that traditional model in terms of I am the supervisor, so what I say goes. But then at the same time, your student is coming in and needs that new knowledge. So, where does that new knowledge come in? And how do you give that student that platform to think differently from you? So, that's one of the challenges we deal with when it comes to this concept of diversity. Any other contributions? Okay, let's just continue then. I'm going to put my slides up again. Sorry, I think I put up the wrong screen. Let me just go again. Okay, so I left you with that question and we've had some thoughts on that. So just to continue from where we what we discussed. Yes, it's about variety. It's a multicultural scenario. So we're looking at different cultural or ethnic backgrounds. We are not necessarily different cultural or ethnic backgrounds, also different genders, right? Different sexual orientations and so on. So the point is you're getting a mixed bag of students to supervise. And one of my colleagues likes to describe this as licorice all sorts. They are not the same, they are all different, and you have different students with different work ethics as well. You will get the student that requires the minimum amount of supervision. You just leave him or her to their own devices, they run with it and they deliver, sorry. Then you'll get the student who needs to be pushed, needs to be constantly checked. So that's the kind of diverse or variety background that we deal with in the context of supervision. Sorry. Then I just want to quickly define what cultural intelligence is. It's about knowing and understanding different cultures. Now, you may come from a culture where work ethic is important. It's important for you to be at work at a certain time and have things done by a certain time. But some of the students that you supervise may not come from that kind of background. To them, it's more important to attend to family first and then come to work. So it's about knowing and understanding the differences in cultures. So I'm going to now leave you with another class activity to do. And for this, I'm going to give you about 10 minutes. I want you to think about what values do we hold as part of our own culture, and how flexible are we around engaging other cultures. So it stems back to that conversation that we had earlier. You may value certain things in your own culture. So it may be important in your culture to wake up early in the morning, get ready, go to work, be there on time. But now, how flexible are we if a student comes back to us and says, sorry, I had to come in late because I had family commitments or whatever. So how do we handle that? So those are the things I want you to think about when we engage in this activity. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes and then we're going to have some discussion around that. So we'll start the discussion at 9:27. Okay, thank you. We've had some time to think about that class activity. Can I hear your thoughts on this? What do you hold? What do you value as part of your own culture, and how flexible are you in terms of adapting to another culture and different ways of doing things? So let's hear from you. If you are not comfortable speaking, you can also type your comments on the chat box. Okay, Andre, go ahead.
Morning, Prof.
Good
Morning,
morning.
everybody. Yeah, so I think not necessarily for me in terms of culture. I'm just very, very mindful of students who have familial or physical illness. I think if the way I've been brought up, I'm from a very, very small town in Limpopo. I grew up in Palabora, next to the Kruger. So my world view of people and culture and race is also very different from somebody that grew up in a typical urban space. So I'm very, very, and also the way I've been brought up, it was one way or no other way. If I think back to my primary and high school years, it was always the adults know best, you do this, etc., etc. But over the years, I taught in a high school for many years before I went into tertiary. Um, if you accommodate the needs of the student, and it's not bending backwards, it's not what I'm saying, but the immediate needs of the students, meeting them halfway. I just think being a basic human being, and for me, humanism comes to mind in terms of accommodating students. That is how I approach it. So for example, if a student is sick or can't come to a class or can't see me, etc., etc., not negotiate with them. I hear them. I give them the opportunity to have a bit of leeway then, but then firmly in terms of the expectation after that, when I, for example, have to see a piece of work or submitted work, etc., etc. But it's
Okay.
just cool.
Okay, thank you, Andre. And I think a very important point came out there is striking the balance between accommodating the student's need, but also being firm at the same time. Deveshri, let's hear what you have to say.
Prof, in terms of my cultural values, I come from um, a community which values respect, discipline, and hard work.
Yeah.
But how flexible are we around this? I think sometimes in my culture, I come from a culture that is very insulated sometimes, and and no fault of our own really, because of the historical circumstances that we've had in South Africa. But when it comes to interaction, once you kind of leave your safe space, so to say, then you learn to do things differently. For example, when I moved from KZN and moved to Mpumalanga, Nelspruit, I found that I had to be more appreciating of critical friends. I had to be more open to different ways of thinking, being, accepting people for their differences. And it actually enhanced me as a human being and the values that I have now, which is to respect diversity, because it makes the way you do things differently. So how does this impact on work? Collaboration, always doing things with others, so that you can get those different spin-offs of handling situations. Thanks, Prof.
Okay, thank you, Deveshri, for sharing that. And indeed, I think given the history of South Africa, we do come from that background where we've been sort of insulated into one culture, and then later on, the need to amalgamate arose. So I'm glad you actually mentioned that. And there's two important things that came out there. One is actually being a human being and understanding another human being's need. And the other one is respect, having respect for each other. And that, I believe, is important in our supervision practices, because it's about understanding where the person you are supervising is coming from, what skills they are lacking, what they need, and you accommodating that into your supervision, and also understanding that the person may not necessarily be on the same page as you are, um, because of the cultural differences, but sort of bridging that gap and bringing some sort of mutual understanding into it. I think one thing that comes up here is language barriers. And language barriers can also impact the way in which a student actually understands you, or what sort of directions you give, and so on. We need to somehow accommodate that. For example, saying this is nonsense in our culture may mean something different to a student who's not from the same culture. They may take offense to that. So it's these little things that we got to bear in mind. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to share before we continue? I just want to check if there's anything written on the chat box. No, nothing. So let's just go back then to my presentation. Okay, so we've sort of unpacked that we need to be flexible when it comes to that human element, and understanding that people are different, and respecting different types of criticisms, different ways of doing things. And then here's another activity for you to think about. And sorry, I'm bombarding you with activities this morning, but this is really an important aspect of our supervision practices. There's 3 important questions I want to think about, and I'm going to actually give you about 20 minutes to think about this, because this is quite long. And that is the question of what are the diversity benefits and challenges in research supervision. So what do you see? Are we getting a mixed bag of students to supervise here? What's the good and the bad and the ugly of it, and how do we deal with that? In what ways can this diversity enhance the successful completion of a postgraduate degree in your specific discipline? Right? And then I want you to think about the role of the knowledge diversity in postgraduate research supervision, and clarify how such diversity impacts the process and the outcomes of research. Now, this is a very important point, because when we speak of diversity, it's not just diversity, different people coming from different cultural backgrounds. It's also you may have different knowledges, right? And you find that the supervisor may be guiding the student along a certain avenue, but the student's got his own ideas. So what happens in that case? How does that impact the process? Do you adopt that model where you're the supervisor and you are always right? Or do you at least accommodate the student, listen to where the student is coming from, and see if that can add some value to the research that you're engaging in? So 3 important questions for you to think about and for us to engage in some discussion. It's quite intense, so I'm going to give you 20 minutes and we'll discuss this around 9:56. Okay, thank you very much. For the benefit of those who just joined us, we were just engaging in this class activity where I gave everyone some time to think about these three questions. That is, what are some of the benefits and challenges involved in diversity in postgraduate research supervision? How does that help the successful completion of a postgraduate degree in your discipline? And also this idea of knowledge diversity, how does that impact on the whole process and the outcome? So I gave everyone about 20 minutes to think about that. Now I want us to engage in some discussion around this. Let me hear your thoughts and your views on those three important questions. I'd like to hear from you guys in terms of how do you view this? Okay, go ahead, Zama Kushle. Okay, Zama Kushle, I think you are muted. We
Oh,
can't hear
okay,
you.
no.
Like that. Thank you.
I think you can hear me now.
Yes, I can.
Yeah, I think in terms of the benefits is that, in postgraduate supervision, we have a number of students who come from different backgrounds, different experiences, and different cultures of knowledge. So I think in having this diverse pool of students, it enables it enables collaborative voices on how to develop knowledge and how to create knowledge, because or even construct knowledge, because in postgraduate supervision or the postgraduate education space is knowledge driven, so we are able to have collaborative voices or a number of voices amongst the students. And there's an ability of peer learning and development of student cohorts. So that on its own, I think it brings a vast majority of ideas, knowledge and thinking, and and we know that ideas do not belong to a single person alone. So collaborative action in the pursuit of knowledge is enabled in this diversity that we have. So those are the benefits I have.
Okay, thank you, Zama Kushle. So basically, you are looking at an opportunity to collaborate and learn from different people. Now, this is important because now we reaching an age where we are working towards multidisciplinary research. And multidisciplinary research doesn't necessarily imply that one supervisor has all the knowledge and the tools to guide a particular student. So you may have to bring on board research collaborators and co-supervisors who have the skills to guide the student. And the example that we can use there is this demand to engage in 4IR research. 4IR involves knowledge of artificial intelligence. So, are we all boffins on artificial intelligence to guide the student? And if not, we need to provide the platforms where the student engages with experts in that field, and you can add that element to your postgraduate research. So, very important point brought up by Zamo Kushle. Thank you very much. Deveshri, let's hear from you.
Thanks, Prof. I really want to talk to the second question. How can diversity enhance successful completion of postgraduate degree discipline? And for me, what came to mind was that we must be open to different models of supervision. And I think a very interesting model is that of the group supervision model. And I was privy to a meeting with somebody that has used this group supervision model at UKZN, and they were quite successful in terms of getting students to be supervised by a panel of experts, which enhanced the number of students that actually graduated through this model. And it was very interesting because you got different people from different cultural backgrounds, different disciplines, and it really, brought in different ways in which students could actually enhance their work. And therefore, you had a higher success rate using this model. So I think when we think of diversity, we must be open to different models of supervision as well. And that will allow for a more inclusive kind of supervision practice. Thanks, Prof.
Okay, thank you, Deveshi. Yes, a very, very important point that you raised is different models. You find that, okay, the typical cases where one student is being supervised by one supervisor only, but that may not be ideal in terms of achieving the completion goal. You find that the student may require certain skills, and if the supervisor cannot provide the platform to create those skills, you may have to review your supervision model. You may have to bring on board another supervisor, or like Deveshi said, a panel of experts, because that then enabled the student to get all the skills and all the knowledge benefits that he requires to finish in the minimum time. So thank you. That's what I wanted to come out, is like the models that we are using for supervision, are they really confined to the way we think and the way we do things, or are we open to different platforms here?
Prof,
So
sorry, Prof, can I just
yes,
add something?
sure.
So even though that these may be good practice models to thinking about diversity, I think we must not be naive in thinking that, these are easily accepted in academia. Uh,
Yeah.
for example, in the environment I work in, there's lots of resistance to kind of collaborating.
Yes.
Everybody is doing their own independent thing and has a niche about what they want to do. So it's not
Yes.
always easy to collaborate that way, even though theoretically it may make, beautiful sense.
Yeah.
And
No.
and and then when you think of one of the benefits of diversity is we have to think about it allowing for innovation and creativity as well. And
Yes.
so instead of, getting my colleagues in my department to kind of work with the group supervision model and the resistance that I face in that respect, I kind of group supervise my students. So instead of having one-on-one contact with them, I kind of work with them in groups, and that allows for them to kind of feed into each other. So even if somebody doesn't understand me, the other person may, and they can cross language barriers that way. So working with honor students and group supervising it also like lowers a little bit of the pressure on me to have the one-on-one contact and kind of repeat things over and over, because now they kind of work with it collectively. Thanks, Prof.
Okay. No, thanks. I'm actually glad that you mentioned that, because I can also relate to that in my experience. Not everyone is open to collaboration. There are some people who are selfish. They want to hoard information to themselves, or they want to work in silos, and they're not seeing the benefits of working together as a team. It happens in our department as well. I mean, a simple thing like getting an access to an instrument can be a bit of a problem or a challenge sometimes, just because there's this kind of sense that this is my niche area, you shouldn't be treading on it. But what colleagues are failing to see is that big picture. It's about the student, it's not about you and your selfish needs. So I like that model of group supervision, because to a certain extent, I also practice that within my research group. So I have a team of postdocs and senior students, and we do try to have our research group meetings every 2 weeks or so, so that we can help the students as a team. The student doesn't only get the guidance and the supervision from me, but there's other senior students and also the postdocs to help them through that whole process. So thank you, Diveshri. Very important point indeed. Mfundo, go ahead.
Thank you, Prof, and the colleagues that shared their perceptions with regard to the benefits and the challenges of diversity in regard to research and supervision. I just joined now. I'm sorry for that. You'll forgive me if I'm out of hand and I'm not answering what I think they're talking about. So I would add on and say another challenge that is problematic in regard to postgrad research and supervision. I would say it's a communication barrier where the supervisor and the supervisee they have issues in terms of languages and the pronunciation. The pronunciation, for example, it may be problematic where the supervisor maybe is not fluent into that language that is spoken into that cultural groups. Then the resistance to change. If you look at the universities, we, as much as we speak the same language, research and supervision, but the rules and the regulations are not the same. I follow certain precautions and the other institution follow certain precautions. So if the supervisor or the student is resistant to change, then it may cause a serious or a severe challenge in regard to that. Like, for example, moving to University of Cape Town, and I even studied at undergrad, and I'm only going there to do the PhD. Then, if I'm resistant to change to the culture of the institution and the rules and the regulations that are adhered by the institution, that may impede me from completing or finishing my PhD. Then the second question, I would say that the integration and assimilation or cultural assimilation, I think those 2 points can be very important. Like, for example, with regard to the integration, we speak about where the supervisor, for example, or the student adopts the cultural norm of that particular university and research more about the cultural norm of that university. And in regard to cultural assimilation, it's when, for example, the student or the supervisor sacrifice their own information and understanding of research rules and the regulation of their own institution, and also integrate the rules and the regulation of that particular institution. So I wanted to add that. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Mfundo. Again, you've brought up some important points. The language issue, yes, I agree, that is a barrier, that's a challenge that we deal with. And it's not only within the South African context, but sometimes you may get an international student who say completed his degree in that particular language. For example, in my first year class, I have a guy who says he's only learned chemistry in Afrikaans and now he's battling to learn it in English. So, and here I am standing and lecturing in English. I don't know how to teach chemistry in Afrikaans. So, it's that language barrier that is a problem, and it impacts on simple things like presentation skills, writing skills, simple skills that the student needs. And that speaks to the need now for us supervisors to accommodate that. And also, a simple thing like, for example, what you may say in your language that's okay with you. may not be okay with someone else. I gave that example of where the supervisor said to the student, but this is nonsense, this is rubbish. And the student can take offense to that. What the supervisor is really trying to say is, your work is not up to scratch. You need to improve on it, but it's said in a way that it can be offensive to the students, and not all culturals or all cultural backgrounds accommodate that. So the language issue is indeed one of the challenges that we face in diversity. And then, yes, you did indicate that each institution's got its own rules and regulations, its own cultural aspects in terms of what are the requirements for the student to graduate with a master's or a PhD. And it's about you adapting and abiding by those norms. For example, now the PhDs at UJ need to understand that you cannot graduate with a PhD unless you have a minimum of one publication, which is either published already or accepted. And also now the Viva has become a new requirement of its own. You have to go through that oral examination as well. So that's also things that we need to adapt to and accommodate in our changes. So thank you, Mfundo. Kenny, I'm going to now give you a chance to speak.
Thank you very much, Prof, and thank you, colleagues. Mine is a brief one. In terms of the benefits and challenges in research supervision, and I think it speaks as well to the second part. I wanted just to say that I think I view diversity in terms of culture. I believe that there are advantages in my culture, but there are also disadvantages. And sometimes I think the challenges that arise stem from a belief from maybe one party, say the supervisor or the student, not willing to be flexible and to see certain weaknesses in their own culture and also strength in their own culture. So that rigidity, lack of flexibility may also impact on the success of the supervision relationship. I so there are certain things, for example, as well that one can then learn if one is open to learning. They can learn. I think this has been touched on as well. But I can think of way back when I was my first year, we had this elderly person who couldn't type. So I felt because of my cultural kind of leaning, I have to respect my elders, I have to prioritize others. And so I when this elderly person came to me, I then took time to type the assignment for him, and then he submitted on time, and I didn't have enough time to then type and submit my own work. And when I communicated this with the lecturer, he asked me, why didn't you complete? I said, well, I was helping so and so. Then he said, Kenny, I think you are doing something good in respecting your elders, helping other people who can't. But you also have to think about yourself and to prioritize yourself. And for me, that was something different, to say that I need to first consider myself. But I learned from that, I continued to help him, but only after I had finished my own. So I think, even things that are helpful in a culture like respecting elders and considering others might be very helpful and good, but it might also be an impediment to progress. So I think the balance that I think Andre spoke about, I think is also needed. And yeah, that's my intervention. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Kenny. So that's a very good example of how a cultural requirement can impact on progress, right? Here was Kenny thinking he could respect his elder and help his elder, but he didn't realize that it was inhibiting his own progress as well. So these are things that we need to be mindful of when we take on students, and also in terms of working with our peers, colleagues, and so on. So I just want to read out what Sandika has written on the chat box. Oh, earlier on, she did agree with what I said about people working in isolation and not being open to collaboration. So she did agree with that. And then she's written there that she thinks the benefits include different perspectives and approaches that can reduce bias and objectivity in research, and it enhances creativity and innovation. It also assists in breaking stereotypes. Challenges can include misunderstandings, languages, with regards to writing challenges and the application of critical thinking, social issues such as family constraints or part-time jobs, and family responsibilities. So yes, some important points come out of this. We did say that a collaboration provides that platform for multidisciplinary research. It opens avenues for us to be more creative, engage in the 4IR research and whatever's required. And it can break the stereotypes where it's open to different genders, different cultures, and so on. We did touch on the language and the misunderstanding part. But yes, that part about part-time jobs, financial constraints, that is another challenge of its own that emerged, because sometimes a student comes to you approaching you for postgraduate supervision, and you don't even realize that the person in front of you has got family responsibilities as well, possibly because they're an older sibling taking care of younger siblings, or maybe they are just married and committed and still want to undertake these postgraduate studies. So that can be a challenge of its own, because the student doesn't quite meet the deadlines that you set for them. And then what do you do in that case? Do you push the students, or do you just leave them? Or it's a tough one, really, because they can go into extended time, and that can create big problems or big issues. So, and there's faculty guidelines to follow as well. So these are all the kinds of challenges that crop up. So I think we've more or less addressed the three topics that we wanted to discuss there. I don't know if anybody else has got anything else they'd like to share before we continue. So I just want to go back to my screen. So basically, we touched on the benefits, the challenges, the completion, the progress, how it can impact. And then something that we also touched on a little bit, but maybe not too much, is that part about knowledge diversity. We all have different knowledges, different skills. It's important to realize that in the supervision process, we need to share those skills and not, I think we did speak about the part where people want to work in silos and not share the information they have. And that's important in the diverse scenario that we work in. You may find that you may not quite have the same view as your postdoc, for example. Your postdoc can bring in a new twist to the student's project that may be beneficial. So these are all important aspects that we need to consider, and we need to be open to diversity. So I just want to touch on some of the challenges here. I just want to go back. Some of the challenges, I mean, we've spoken about the advantages, but there's this whole approach, the pedagogy challenges, the supervision models, and so forth. And how do we help the student develop in the process, right? If the student is lacking certain knowledge or certain skills or whatever, is it, or do we just leave them to do whatever they want to, or do we provide the platforms where they can improve upon that? So this relates to this whole topic of multicultural education. A student may come to you for supervision. He may be brilliant in terms of creating new knowledge and so on, but his language skills may be lacking. He may be unable to speak English, or he may be unable to write in English. So what sort of skills do you provide him with in order to enable him to become better? And I really feel it is our job to do this. And then something we spoke about at length in Unit 1 is this whole idea of decolonization and cognitive justice, right? Are we open to different suggestions or different views or different ways of thinking? Or do we just want to be rigid and hard and say, no, I am the boss, I am guiding you, whatever, you know? And it's about also the students' research having some kind of relevance. Do you take a student from a rural area and expect them to go and solve America's problems when the rural area itself may have some kind of challenges that need to be investigated, right? And it's all about including different forms of knowledge, promoting this idea that different people have different cultures of knowledge that can benefit the student. And this is where the whole idea of collaboration comes in. So then we did touch on communication, especially when we dealt with the language aspects. So I'm going to look at the savoies of intercultural communication. One is knowing the different cultures, the beliefs, the reference points, right? So if a student comes to you and his first language is Zulu, you need to know that. You need to know that the student may not be able to understand everything that you are saying in English. So it's about knowing, it's about being or empathizing, understanding and dealing with it, right? It's sometimes I find that if you tend to even say a word or two of the student's language to him, or even if you greet him or her in their own language, that sort of breaks the barrier a little bit, because the student doesn't see you as that monster that he can't communicate with. It sort of makes him feel more comfortable in speaking with. So you try to learn about their culture. You approach them with curiosity. Just to give you an example, I once had a year-end function with my students in which I tried to greet in all the different languages when I started my speech. So that gave them a sense of belonging, to know that, you know what, at least she's trying to greet in my language. So it's about showing curiosity for the culture differences, having the sense of openness to show the student, look, I'm here to teach you, but I'm also willing to learn from you. So it's about that. And then the other point is, yes, learning about the culture, interpreting how others live, how they think, they feel, and they communicate. It's sort of understanding that background that your student comes from. Yeah, so that leads to the next point about understanding their meanings, their beliefs, their practices in comparison to your own culture. So your culture may be, let's wake up early in the morning, let's get to work as soon as possible. But a student can rock up a bit later. He can say to you, sorry, I had to go leave my child at school. I had this and that to do. And it's a simple thing, like when you're having a function where you want to have the sort of an icebreaker session with your students, do you cater for everyone's dietary needs and so on, so that everyone feels included, no one feels left out? And it's about engaging and dealing with sort of a critical aspects, looking at your culture a little bit more critically and seeing whether it's accommodating to other cultures, you know. Maybe some of us are set in our ways and the way in which we do things, but now this cultural diversities brings in some change. Like Andre said, we have to learn how to be human beings as well. We have to understand that sometimes our students have challenges and we cannot be too hard, but obviously you've got to strike that balance. They must not also, it must not get to the point where the student just takes advantage of the whole process as well, and then it damages the whole process. So these are some of the important aspects to consider when dealing with intercultural communication. So when we come to inclusion in knowledge and the diversity aspect, there's the story of the South African context versus the traditional norms of Western science or the Western knowledge system. And it's all about relating to societal problems and knowledge plurality. Now, one thing our VC at UJ is very passionate about is about solving societal problems. So the South African community has its own problems. Some of them are common in the rest of the world. So we all know the story about for example, this issue of water scarcity. It's not something that's unique to South Africa. It impacts on the whole world. But then there are some other problems that may be unique to South Africa, problems such as power. Well, not necessarily only South Africa, but African countries in general, the issue of poverty, job scarcity, and so on. So we need to understand that the problem that the student is solving, the research has to be relevant and applicable. It needs to be something that the student can relate to and not necessarily what's happening in another part of the world. But at the same time, if two countries have a similar problem, then there's ways to come together and solve that problem in your collaboration. And coming to this whole concept of knowledge plurality, we got to understand that different students come from different backgrounds. They may understand things in a different way, right? Or sometimes your student may come from an engineering background and you are a scientist. So what do you do in that case? How do you accommodate his engineering knowledge or his engineering background and so on, right? So we've been going on for over an hour. What I'm going to suggest we do now is it's almost 10:30. Let's take a 10-minute break. Then at 10:38, I want you to consider this topic, which we can actually debate in class. I want you to note the purposes of working towards knowledge diversity, how the communities of the future will grow in diversity, and they may require new social contracts. So basically, we're looking at a social contract between the university and society. This comes from one of your readings, and which focuses on the imperatives of knowledge inclusion, right? So I want you to think about, is the university an independent body from society? Or is there now a need for university and society to come together and work towards knowledge diversity? So in terms of the break, let's have a 10-minute break. Then from 10:39 to 10:49, I want you to think about this. So we'll reconvene at 10:49 to engage in some discussion around this topic. Let's debate it and let's just see, are there ways in which the universities and society can come together? Okay. So thank you. Oh, sorry, I see it's exactly 10:30 now. So let's have a 10-minute break and then 10 minutes to think about this topic. So we'll reconvene then at 10:50. Okay, thank you, everyone. So you've had a chance to have a break and also think about this topic that we're going to debate, where there's a need for knowledge diversity, but that now require us to form contracts with society, and that's those of us working in a university environment. Okay, so I'm keen and eager to listen to some of your thoughts on that topic. Do you agree or disagree with that statement that we're now evolving towards an era where one needs to include society in the research? that we engage in and form contracts with society. Let me hear your thoughts on that. Okay, go ahead, Mfundo.
Thank you, Prof. I think I agree. Not that I think I concur. I agree with the statement. I've read some articles. I think it was the first semester where I was looking at the university as the state of agency into the community. And when I was reviewing the literature, I was collaborating with someone discussing about the state of the university, especially the Mandela as a state of agents into the community of Gqeberha, and with regard the water shortage in the province or in the city. And we engage with a number of communities and including the municipality. And my colleague and I shared the findings in terms of the challenges and the solution that can be implemented with regard the challenge of water in the city or in the greater area of Gqeberha. Then also again, my other colleague in the media and communication and specializing with animation and design is collaborating with a number of schools, Quintal 3 in the greater area of Gqeberha, where engaging with students, teaching them the robotic stuff, and also teaching the student the animation to enhance teaching and learning in the classroom, and also teaching the teachers in those disadvantaged schools in terms of incorporating and utilizing technology in the space of teaching and learning. And I've seen articles, Dr. Mary Mungwe, Muchai, the senior lecturer in the School of Education in Kenya, where he says many universities have tried to address the pressing negative impact of gender-related violence by way of action, research, and action plans that address the equality and the inclusion in the society. So a number of universities, even in South Africa, worldwide, they are also intervening and trying to spread the word about the gender-based violence in our communities or in our societies at large. I've read Walter and Sebastian, where they speak about the university worldwide are constantly presenting their commitment to preparing students to the role of a role in society where they can contribute to a climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. So, which means education plays a very crucial role in changing people's lives, people's behavior, attitude, particularly the young people in the classroom that can learn about the impact of climate change and also influences their family members in their society. I think, yeah, that's my part or my take on the topic. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mfundo. Indeed, you unpacked a number of societal problems that have spoken to this need. Let's hear from Deveshri.
Thanks, Prof. As we enter into an era where there is very limited funding and governments are really pressed for funds, we really need to recognize that the university can no longer be the beacon on the hill, where all the professors have this, the storehouse of knowledge, or towers of knowledge, so to say, that is very disjointed from the rest of the society. And what this really means is that, and we're very thankful for the economic pressures that force us to think of the university being a partner, and kind of now embracing this public-private partnership model, where universities have skills, capabilities, resources at their disposal in terms of the academics and the work that they do, where governments and the private sector are really funding instruments, and also policy drivers that can effectively, target funding into particular areas. And the communities we cannot ignore or exclude, because they are the ones that really experience the problems. And their knowledge, both indigenous knowledge, but also their practical implications of how their lived experiences usher in new problems for society, needs to be recognized. We cannot be theoretically driven and expect to solve society's problems. So this collaborative model is really a 21st century trajectory, globally, where we are asking for universities, communities, and government or private sector to partner, and in it to usher in an era of more inclusive development for society. And really is about a feedback loop when we take the knowledge from the communities into the universities, and the universities help theoretically solve these problems, and that kind of trajectory. Thanks, Prof.
Okay, thank you, Deveshri. I think, indeed, both what you and Mfundo have contributed speaks to that need. We're not just engaging in research or knowledge production for the sake of it. We really want to go out there and solve real societal problems. So I just want to read Tobogo's response on the chat box. She says she agrees with the statement as it aligns with the idea of societal problems and community engagement, and it supports the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Now, remember, those UN Sustainable Development Goals are not only speaking to the needs of South Africa, they're looking at it worldwide, but we in South Africa have a lot of problems such as poverty, hunger, water scarcity that speak to those sustainable development goals. So it's important for us to engage in research that solves the community's problems, and not just research that's done for the sake of doing research and published in a paper or a book and forgotten about. So I think one of the ways in which we do research has evolved is we need to go out there and find real problems that we can research in our specific field. Mfundo, go ahead.
I was going to ask Prof. I was going to ask you a question. If I may say that many of the research, not many of the research that we conduct in our discipline or in our universities, we get them from the society. We identify issues that are impacting the society, and we bring those issues that are impacting the society into our discipline, where we conduct an academic research, and the academic research that we conduct, it seeks to solve the society problems or the issue that the society is confronted with. So I was going to say we cannot survive without the society. We cannot survive without whatever issues that are impacting the society, because we respond to the issues that are impacting the society as we are the state of agency into our community. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Mfundo. Indeed, you are correct there. In order to engage in research, one has to identify a problem, and it has to be a problem that exists out there, not a problem that's got to be solved just for the sake of doing research. Okay. Let me give Gabriel a chance, and then Deveshri after him.
Okay, Prof. Good morning, colleagues. Okay, some of the the points that I highlight have already been raised by the previous speakers. But I just wanted to say that the essence of undertaking academic research is for us to provide solutions to existing societal problems. I think that is the first point that I want to make. When we do research, it involves many facets. Some of them which are financial. In economics, we put a cost to everything. There's always opportunity cost for anything that we. For you to do something, there's something that you would have forgone. That we also put a monetary value on. So there are other issues that speak to time, financial resources, in many other aspects. That also, that we can, that involves, the research itself. So we cannot divorce in the university academic activities, the research activities with societal problems. So this marriage, it's one that cannot be dissolved. And some ways, in which the two can coexist. It also involves the issues of the community engaging in service and learning, where the universities, they address societal issues and enhance students' practical skills. So we can also see collaborative research that leads to innovations that benefits the society. There's also issues of advocating for social change, offering of lifelong learning programs, that is from the university side, as well as facilitating workforce through development of things such as internships. Another important thing as well is that the relationship, it should be a synergistic relationship that enhances education, also promotes innovation and address at large societal challenges for the betterment of the community. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much, Gabriel. And indeed, I think both you and Deveshri have raised that point about funding as well. One of the challenges in research is you require funding to go ahead. You cannot go ahead without this. So this it sort of doesn't cut it that universities need to operate on their own. You need society to come in, you need external funders to come in. And that's very important in solving our societal problems as well. So we need to work not only with the community, but also with the industrial and the corporate sectors in terms of getting the funding coming in to solve their problems. So thank you for sharing that, Gabriel. Deveshri, go ahead.
Thanks, Prof. In this debate, it's fair to say that as researchers, we engage in identifying, societal challenges, problems, issues, and we kind of navigate our research around solving these problems. But what is the impact of it? I mean, is it a thesis or a paper that's in an academic journal, or does it end up in a shelf in our library? But how does it actually trickle down to the societies in which we aim to solve the problems that exist? And I'm sure that a lot of the researchers in this room would agree that when we do fieldwork research, and we're asking people in interviews, about these issues that they experience, one of the questions that always emerges is, how is this research going to change our lived circumstances? What difference is this going to make to us? And over and over again, we get that. And we have to start thinking about, how do we bridge that gap? How do we take our research to the ground to create that impact? Do we actually, have to think about advocacy in terms of the output of our research? Do we actually take models to private sector so that they can actually create some sort of product in order to solve these issues. It's good enough to say in an objective in research that we want to, influence policy, but how do we actually do that? And I think that's a very important thing to think about in terms of this knowledge transition with the societies. Thanks, Prof.
Okay. Yes, Deveshri, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, in fact, most universities are now being pushed towards this whole drive of commercializing research and developing products and prototypes, which we seriously need to start thinking about. It's not just about engaging in the research, publishing the papers, letting the student write the thesis, and thereafter it stops there. It's about taking an aspect of the student's work and saying, hey, this worked. So let's go to an industrial partner and see how we can work together in developing a product out of this that will benefit the community. And that's really the route that research has taken. It's not just about academic research anymore. It's about business. It's about entrepreneurship. It's about really taking the tools we've developed to society and saying, let's develop it into a product or a prototype that will speak to the community's needs. So yes, I agree with you, Deveshri, and there are some challenges with that. I mean, we academics, we go to the classroom, we teach, we guide our students, but we don't necessarily have that know-how or that expertise on how to take your research forward. And this is where our corporate or business partners come in. And this is also where our technology transfer offices come in. That's very important, but it started and it's happening because if you look at maybe some 20 years ago, solar panels did not exist. But people saw the need and they did research onto it. And now we have these solar panels and inverters, which we can install to overcome this problem with power outages, right? Because that's something that our South African community and other communities around the world have been hard hit with this issue of energy crisis and power outages. So it has to start somewhere. And then maybe some 30, 40 years ago, we didn't even have mobile phones, but now we have it. So we need to look at that drive for converting our research into a business as well that speaks to societal needs. Okay, so thank you. I think that's a very important point that you brought up there, Deveshri. Does anybody else want to share anything about that topic that we're debating right now? Okay, I see Jackie's written something on the chat box. She agrees with the statement, and these are addressed by outreach activities. It also refers to community engagement, and this is another teaching setting and helping the community solving its own problems and getting research problems and addressing gaps. Again, it's another way of giving back to the communities as institutions are developed, and that should take accountability. Another important point brought up in her argument there. Very often we get different areas of the academic profession where we need to prove ourselves. And there's the teaching and learning, there's the research and research productivity, and there's a community engagement aspect. So I think Jackie's comments are saying, let's not see this as separate entities. Let's amalgamate them. Let's inform the communities of our teaching practices and how they can help. Let's inform them of the research that we're doing and how it's going to help. So we don't necessarily have to view the different facets of the academic profession as separate entities. They're all one and the same. So part of our job as academics is to give back to the community, and we can sort of incorporate that with our teaching and learning and our research activities. So thank you, Jackie. That was another important point that you raised there. Any other comments or views on the statement? Okay,
Can I
Deveshri, yeah,
say,
sure.
Sometimes service always starts at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to share a quick experience about our postgraduate research handbook.
Mm-hmm.
We've done the research handbook hoping that it would have an impact, and that would serve the postgraduate students and be a resource for them. And this week when I said to my head of school, well, I've developed this handbook, and he says, oh, okay, it's just a teaching resource, okay. And he refused to recognize that it was, research as a research output or a community engagement output. He just thought of it as a teaching resource and was willing to give me a KPA for teaching and learning for it. And this example just speaks to the resistance we sometimes face in academia, and that not everybody kind of sees things that the way we do. And that's kind of sad, and it doesn't change sometimes with the older academics in there that are very stuck in their ways. So that's we have to consider as well in terms of how we're moving with this university becoming more integrated with the communities, that there is this factor of resistance that exists out there, and we're going to have to be very mindful of how we kind of overcome that as emerging researchers.
Yeah, well, I can sort of identify with that because not everybody is open to change. You will get these very old conservative professors who feel it's their way or no way, and they see teaching, research, and community engagement as separate entities, but I don't agree with that. I believe we can amalgamate it into one entity because really that handbook that you had to develop, it's not only providing the student with knowledge. You've identified gaps in the postgraduate research supervision that needed to be addressed by this, and that's research. And yes, and the students are our community. They're a community of their own guide, and even your peers. You have a scientific or a research community that needs to read that handbook and learn something. But yes, not everybody sees it that way. Some people are very rigid in the way that they are thinking. And you will get this more with the older academics who are not very welcome to change. They just want to stick. And that's one of the challenges that we face as well. So I'm glad you mentioned this. Yes, it is a challenge. I experience it all the time. I mean, I've made changes to my research that some people just don't believe in, and they want to ask some critical questions on it, but not realizing that it's speaking to a different need, right? That has arisen. So thank you for sharing that, Deveshri. Okay, I think we've had quite a productive discussion on that, and I think we've learned something new that, you know what, we are conducting research for a community, not just to train students and put them out there into the real world. So I want to go back now to my slide. Okay, so this was a topic that really took us through some intense discussion. So when we're looking at the knowledge challenges, we also have to think about things like knowledge development in rural areas. Remember that there's challenges, and I think even Andre brought this up earlier, challenges that we deal with in rural communities. They're not as well equipped as urban communities one of the challenges that we may identify with is this internet connectivity. You find that everything now is about having access to the internet. So students who live in rural areas might not have good internet access or good internet connectivity. And that alone is a knowledge challenge, because how do they join online classes? How do they join online meetings and so on? Or how do they engage in online webinars that may benefit them for their research and so on? And one also needs to link this to cognitive justice. Is it fair for us to set up a research meeting when there's a couple of students in our group that cannot join online? And I think many of us may have experienced this during the COVID-19 pandemic, where everything suddenly became online, and you found you had to cater for that student that didn't quite have access. They got sent home because they couldn't stay in the residence, and then their home is in a rural area. How do they access the internet? Now, that's just one example, right? Another example may be the example of clean, fresh water. This is a problem in rural communities as well. So that's just two examples. So basically, we need, in considering these diverse research approaches, we need to also look at developing indigenous knowledge systems. Now, this stems back to our debate about the societal issues and the societal problems. Sorry. So we need to look at some of the challenges that rural communities have and see how we can bring our research into it. There's been a lot of research done on delivering clean water to rural communities. How do we take that and develop it into an actual product or prototype that can address this? How do we improve internet connectivity in the rural areas? These are the kinds of knowledge challenges that we are facing that speaks to the kind of research that we undertake. And it's also about the issue of different disciplines coming together to solve a single problem. I want us to now engage in another debate, and sorry, this morning has been just full of work for you, but hopefully what we're sharing is helping us in developing that final portfolio. And that's the concept of knowledge plurality. What is it actually? What does it mean? And if you read that reading reference by Odora Hoppers, it's called the educational ideal. It's said to be a system of inclusion where we need to broaden research and knowledge and production to include all sectors of society. So not just a specific sector. It may include the business sector, the banking sector, and so on. And at the same time, while focusing on your specific society, it may encompass worldviews, knowledge category systems, and so on. So I want us to think about this topic and engage in a discussion about that. Is knowledge plurality, where we have to extend our research and knowledge, is it really the educational ideal? Or do we face some challenges? I think we have unpacked some of the ideas in our previous discussion, but I want us to think about it. It's one thing to really say we need knowledge plurality and we need to join hands with society and make this happen. But is it that easy to do? Is it really the educational ideal right now? What are some of the challenges that we encounter in developing this? So I'm going to give you 10 minutes to think about that topic. We're going to reconvene at 11:30 to discuss that. Thank you. I did give you an extra minute as well to think about this whole idea of knowledge plurality and the whole idea of inclusion, worldviews, and so on. So I want to hear your thoughts and your views on this statement. In a way, it does relate back to what we discussed earlier. But knowledge plurality means bringing different sectors together. And the question is, how do we do that? Is it easy to actually do that? I want to hear your thoughts on that. Any thoughts, comments, or suggestions? And we did touch on some of the challenges of this. And one of the challenges is actually, I think we unpacked some of the challenges in what Deveshri said. Is this knowledge plurality really solving what we are aiming to achieve there? And then bringing different sectors together, not just locally, but globally, can be a challenge in itself. So, and then there's also the question is of whether there is enough money available for us to do this. Gabriel, go ahead.
Okay, Prof. I just want to say that okay, while it address issues of equity and justice, and also prepare students for global engagement, some of the challenges in achieving this are centered around the issue of possibly the requirement of curriculum reform, also effective teacher training, institutional support, and also all those, they have to be integrated into the diverse knowledge system, and education as well. So maybe
Yeah.
that's an additional challenge that I can say.
Yeah, because yes, of course, that's another important point that you've raised. You cannot expect to engage postgraduate research on a particular topic if there's no background from the undergraduate curriculum. So this presents our teachers in the school and also those of us teaching at undergraduate level, it presents us with the challenge where we've got to reform our curriculum. The curriculum has to teach certain concepts so it can be taken forward at postgraduate level. And one of the challenges we do face in the South African schools is not all schools have the resources available. Some of those schools don't even have the basic equipment to teach practical classes in science, let alone engaging their students in technology and so on. So yes, it's nice to say that we're going to go this route of knowledge plurality and bring together different sectors, but it's how we work together in addressing the challenges that's going to be key in terms of how this fully works. Okay, any other comments on this topic? Okay, and remember when it comes to working with international partners as well, the international partner has to have an understanding of the South African context as well. You can't just send a student across and the student doesn't know what's going on because they are a little bit more advanced in what they are doing. So these are little things that crop up in knowledge plurality, and we need to ensure that the resources are there to help our students. Mfundo?
Prof, it's not a question, it's not a statement, and I can't even code it as well. I don't know how to put this together. I was pondering about umhlonyane, the one that we drank is Astemisia. when we had COVID, and I didn't see a lot of a research or a response to that traditional medicine that we use as as Africans, especially when we have a flu, and which helps us with respiratory, coughing, and common colds and etc. So it is very good. When I was a child, I used to drink that when I cough or maybe have got flu. So during the COVID-19, people always on social media speaking about drinking umhlonyane, but I didn't see scientists, or maybe I didn't pay attention. So colleagues can correct me. So I'm thinking about the indigenous knowledge or the local knowledge, and the knowledge of scientists in collaborating or in responding to indigenous knowledge with regard the traditional medicine during the COVID-19 as a medication that can help you when you have when you've got flu. So I don't know how to put it, Prof, but it's there in my mind.
Okay. No, it's good that you brought that up, Mfundo, because that shows us now an example of how not everybody is responsive to indigenous knowledge. There is a traditional African medicine out there which could have even, if developed or studied further in a lab, it could have cured, maybe even provided us with a cure. But not the entire world or community was responsive to that. Some people preferred the route of exploring ivermectin and other means of controlling the COVID virus. So I think you've brought up an important point where indigenous knowledge could have helped solve a global crisis, but because we're not all so receptive to it, and there's this issue of knowledge inclusion that cropped up that actually made people not want to try it. I mean, always when there's something new, people tend to question it and debate it, but that is a new form of medicine that could have provided a solution to the problem. Deveshti, you go ahead.
Thanks, Prof. I really do believe that in terms of knowledge plurality, that knowledge is not absolute. It's a very complex, multifaceted kind of area. And it really, when we think about this and when we think about conceptualizing research in terms of community impact, I think it's so important to bring in people at the very onset when we conceptualizing these projects, for example, community leaders and community members who have actually dealt with this problem prior. Remember, we're living in a complex social world. Some of our problems have been, in fact, dealt with on the ground prior. And I think if we embrace diversity and if we're humble enough to recognize that there are people that do have ways of dealing with the problems they're faced with, then that could actually enhance us, and the research that we're doing. It could become more comprehensive and really be more inclusive. One of the challenges I do believe that, using this kind of model is that we also have, as researchers, we have to also consider how reliable and valid is the knowledge that we're engaging with from the outside. Yeah. Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, no, thank you, Deveshri. Yes, that's also an important point, really. And what you're touching on here, there's this whole idea of multidisciplinary research. You find that a real societal problem is not necessarily a problem that the humanities can solve or the sciences can solve. There may be a call for engineers right? I once had a colleague who said to me, you cannot commercialize without involving engineers because they have some knowledge of product development which we don't have. And that could be true because at the end of the day, if you go out into the real world, it's about different people coming together and working as a network to solve a specific problem. So one can take a big company like SAPI. SAPI is responsible for paper production, but there's engineers, there's chemists, there's a whole lot of people involved in that product development. So we need to we need to move away from working in silos. Yes, you are the scientist who developed a certain tool that works in the lab, but give it to an engineer to test it on a bigger scale to see whether it can solve a real life problem. So that's what I think more or less what you're getting at, Deveshri, is knowledge inclusion means involving other people and not just working in silos by yourself and thinking you can solve the problem all by yourself. It doesn't involve that. It involves different people coming together as a team. And that's why in the last 10 years or maybe even 15 years, we've seen research move towards a multidisciplinary phase where now people across different disciplines are collaborating with each other. And if we take the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, it brought together different people, not only medical practitioners from the health sciences, but also scientists involved in drug development. There were people looking at the societal implications of COVID. So different areas of research were coming together. And I'm involved in water cleanup research. So people were even concerned. I know the WRC expressed a concern of the fact that there could be COVID fragments in sewage water that can impact on human health. And so we were brought on board to look at the wastewater challenges there. So it involved a multidisciplinary approach to solve a global problem. That was a good example of how we need to work together and take a multidisciplinary approach towards solving these global and societal problems. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to add to this whole idea of knowledge plurality? Okay, so basically we see research evolving here. It's not about developing a new theory and concept in physics or chemistry or whatever. It's about taking it to the next level, working with engineers and so on to get it into a product that can solve real life problems. And that's where I really see this whole idea of knowledge plurality going. Okay, so let's continue from there. Okay, I think we've now come to the end. Sorry, I just didn't realize that. We've come to the end of the first part of Unit 3. And what I'm going to do now is, because we do have enough contact sessions available, I'm not going to labor this whole issue. We've unpacked the first part of it. So I am going to continue with the second part of Unit 3 on Thursday evening. But what I quickly want to do is go to your study material and talk you through some of the activities that are important for this particular section of the work, and then maybe we can call it a day after that. And we still have next Thursday's contact session and also the Saturday contact session next week. to wrap up Unit 3 and discuss the final assessments and so on. So I really don't want to rush things today as such. And also, I think you guys need some time to actually reflect and work through the activities and assignments. So although these sessions have been designed for us to go until 4 o'clock on Saturdays, I would prefer to conclude around 1 o'clock. So that gives you an opportunity to use your what you call your time to engage in the activities and assignments and so on. Sorry, I just got a technical problem with my projection here. Just allow me about 5 minutes to sort this out. I'll be back in. My apologies. I was just having a technical issue with sharing my screen. Now I think I've more or less sorted it out. Like I was saying to you, it's important that you also have time to work through your activities and so on. Can everyone see my screen now? Okay, Diveshri, you've got your hand up. Is there something you'd like to say?
Prof, are we meeting next week Saturday? It's the long weekend.
Okay, let me just quickly discuss the activities. Then we'll look at the schedule and
Thanks,
we'll
Prof.
see if there's really a need for us to meet or not. Because yes, I am aware that there's a long weekend and people may have made plans for the long weekend and so on. But let's just see how far we can get on Thursday as well. I'm sure we can complete Unit 3 on Thursday quite comfortably. I just don't want to drag it on today, because if I do drag it on, then it might be a little bit too much for everybody to absorb. So I'm now in your study material. I just want to look at some of the activities and activity 3.1 relates back to what we had as our first activity in class, is to share your initial views on diversity and what you consider. So in a way, we did that activity in class. A few people shared their responses, but you can do so on the discussion forum, a platform as well. Then the second activity in Unit 3 looks at the possible implication of diversity for supervision practical practices. So you have to look at the article by Manatunga, and he looks at it in the context of Australia. And I want you to read that article and write a 2-page reading response based on that article, summarizing Manatunga's concepts on some of the simple notions of culture, things like time, place, and knowledge, the limitations of language, which we did discuss, and also transculturation. So that's specifically in the Australian context. But you can, in your reading response, also look at whether it caters for other contexts, like the South African context and so on. So that was activity 3.2. And then there is a second part to activity. Oh, yes. The second part to activity 3.2, where you look at possible implications of diversity in supervision practices, and that's where you reply to each other's reading responses, reflect on the implications for supervision practices. What actions do you think need to be taken by the supervisor to ensure that there's no power issues that are hindering progress, and so to speak? So the first part is a reading response to the article. The second part is looking at what implications that this has for the supervision practices. And then activity 3.2 enables you to rate your own 3.3 enables you to rate your own intercultural competence. And there you referred to some readings. There's one by Guerin, Picard, and Green, and also another one about by Deerdorf, where this topic of intercultural competence is discussed. So what you're going to do is read those articles, see what you can get out of the article on this topic of intercultural competence. And then you're going to engage in a self-evaluation of how you rate your own intercultural competence. You score yourself out of 10 and you provide reasons for why you've given yourself the score. And if it's a score below 10, obviously you're going to need to make comments on how you're going to improve that score or ensure that you attain a 10 out of 10. So that was activity 3.3. Then activity 3.4 looks at the need and possibilities of knowledge plurality and inclusion. So you're going to look at all the readings provided on this unit, and you may also refer back to the readings given for Learning Unit 1, right? And your interpretations of cognitive justice needs. And then you're going to look at the need for possibilities of knowledge plurality and inclusion of additional knowledge systems in your discipline. So in other words, you're going to critically reflect on your current practices. Does it address the cognitive justice needs? What sort of knowledge plurality and inclusion do you need to bring into your current practice to speak to those needs? So that's activity 3.4. Then the section 3.2 is really the second part of unit 3, which we're going to unpack on in Thursday's class session. So I want to just go back to our schedule and just look at where we are. And that's to address Deveshri's question about whether we are having a session next Saturday, because it is actually a public, well, it's a long weekend, but Saturday is not the actual public holiday. It's actually Friday, that's the public holiday. Let me just quickly look at, so now we're here on Saturday, the 3rd of August. We do have a contact, oh, I see, sorry, it's my mistake. And I take responsibility for my mistake. We don't have a contact session scheduled for next Saturday. So we can conclude Unit 3 on Thursday. We have enough time available. That is, we have 2 hours in which I can conclude the second part of Unit 3. Then after next Thursday, we have a session on the 15th of August, which is also a Thursday. And I can finish, what I can do now in the 2 more contact sessions that we have left is I can wrap up Unit 3 on Thursday, and then the following Thursday we can have a discussion on your final assessments, what is required, and we can have a question and answer session where I can, address all your concerns about that. And then I see after contact session 6 on the 15th of August, it's quite a long break before we meet again on the 7th of September, for your presentations and the exam preparation part. So I know some of you have contacted me already and said you won't be available that week. So I've made my own separate arrangements. So I think we are fine. We moved at a nice pace. I've only got one more part of Unit 3 left, which we can conclude in Thursday's class, and I can talk you through the activities and the assignment as well for Unit 3. So when we actually meet again on the 15th of August, I can spend that session discussing your presentation and your final portfolio, and maybe even show you an example of some good portfolios that have scored some good marks. And then we have a long break, and then we'll meet again on the 7th of September to actually discuss or for you to do your presentations. Now, those who can't make it on the 7th of September, I have communicated with you already in terms of what you need to do. Basically, you just need to record your presentation on record your presentation and send it to me, and I'll be able to assess it on the basis of that. So I think we can conclude today. Do I have any questions or any doubts? Anything you want to discuss with me today?
Prof, a quick question.
Sure.
So there's reflections, activities, assignment. If I'm kind of navigating through what we need to put in our portfolio.
Yeah.
So in the reflections, we are reflecting on diversity and what we did in class. And then in the activity, and like in 3.1, what are your views about diversity? Are we not repeating ourselves?
Well, there may be some aspects that I've not covered in class, and it may come up in the readings.
Yes.
And the literature that you have to go through. So I think it is important for you to look at the literature, engage with the literature, and unpack some of the things that we may have not covered adequately in these contact sessions.
Thank you.
Okay, I hope that clarifies. Any other questions? Okay, then let me conclude for today. So we'll meet again on Thursday evening at 5 o'clock. I wish you a lovely weekend, but please remember, don't let your activities accumulate all for the last minute. Try and work through them as we go. We cover the different sections because that will help you. And also we have 2 more contact sessions where if you're not sure what to do in any of the activities, you can also use that as a platform to ask questions. So thank you very much and have a good weekend.
Thank you very much. Prof. Bye.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Prof. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Okay, thank you. Bye.